Hello, listeners. It's your host, Dacia. That was for you Twin Peaks fans out there, by the way. You're about to hear my chat with, and please forgive my not French, Fabien Gabel. He was a conductor who was here in Houston to lead the Symphony and pieces by Mendelssohn and Tchaikovsky. So while he was here in town, we chatted about, you guessed it, Mendelssohn and Tchaikovsky. Prior to our chat, Fabien and I had talked via Skype, and Fabien is the only person that I've ever talked with on Skype who did not appear as if being seen through a fisheye lens, which I assume is because he's French and they know how to do things. By the way, did you know that you guys made us #1 on the iTunes Music Podcast chart this week? If you want to help us stay on that spot, make sure to subscribe to, rate us, and review us on iTunes, and thank you so much. You guys rock. Okay, enjoy the episode. There's a rumor going around that classical music can be hoity-toity. But here in the classical classroom, we beg to differ.
Beethoven 5.
The idea that classical music is a zone where we have to feel restricted or we have to act in a certain way, that's not going to be helpful going forward.
Isaiah is shaking with excitement here. I mean, there's just so many great parts of the opera.
He asked me to play his favorite spot in the first movement of the Brahms. And then he said, I started using those licks in my guitar solos.
How to be classical music rock stars, because there's not enough of that in this business.
Occasionally I would plug in the mandolin to my distortion pedals.
I don't change my voice.
Talking to classical music voice.
I'm playing classical music now. I mean, it's the same 12 notes. That's what's so cool about it.
I'm Dacia Clay, a classical music newbie, and I'm trying to learn all I can about the music. Come learn with me and the classical music experts I invite into the Classical Classroom. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Dacia Clay, and here with me today in the studio is Fabien Gabel, who says his name in such a much nicer way than I do, but he is the music director of the Quebec Symphony Orchestra. He's worked with major soloists and orchestras all over the world. Speaking of major orchestras, he's about to conduct our own Houston Symphony in a program of pieces by Mendelssohn and Tchaikovsky. Fabien, welcome to the Classical Classroom.
Hello.
So you've got these 3 pieces on the program. The Mendelssohn, actually, why don't you tell me what's on the program that you've got coming up?
The first half, we have 2 pieces by Mendelssohn. One of the most famous overture he composed, the Hebrides, the Fingal Cave, Fingal's Cave, and the first piano concerto. And the second half, we have Tchaikovsky's 6th Symphony.
So tell me, I want to talk because we've, as many of our listeners know, we've already got this whole episode on that symphony by Tchaikovsky, the say it again?
Pathetique.
Thank you. And that's also known as the Suicide Symphony, right? Is it?
That's the legend that he commits suicide.
Right.
A few days after the first performance, but maybe it's just a romance. We don't know.
You guys should have seen his eye roll when I said that. That was pretty good. So since I've talked a lot about that piece on the show, I want to learn a little bit more about Mendelssohn. Can you tell me just who Mendelssohn was, when he lived, who were his contemporaries?
Okay, so Mendelssohn lived in the first half of the 19th century in Germany, and he came from a very artistic family. His grandfather was a famous philosopher, and he was a prodigy. We say Wunderkind. He was as a child, and he had the ability to play the piano, to compose very early, like Mozart. And also he has the ability to paint and draw. There are many draws in some libraries, and it's absolutely amazing. He had a lot of talent. Yeah. And he was same generation than Robert Schumann, Franz Liszt, Richard Wagner, Berlioz. But some people consider him as a composer as the last composer of the classicism. Because his music has a reputation to be very classical, but very inspiring and inspired.
What does that mean?
Classical music, the classicism that's the period in the history of music before Romanticism. And this is Mozart, Haydn, and in a way Beethoven, who was a pre-romantic at the end of his life.
Okay.
But yes, he's considered by several musicologists, and especially at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, as the last of the classics. Classics. I don't know how you say that, but some other musicologists say he was the first romantic.
Ah, okay.
So, and also he died quite early. Quite young. He died in 1847. I think he was 38, something like that. So he had a very short life, but very intense life, because he traveled all over Europe, in France, in Italy, and of course in Scotland, in Great Britain. Yeah. He was very successful in his time as a soloist, but also as a composer and as a conductor. And also is renowned today because he was the chief conductor of one of the most famous orchestra today in Germany, the Gewandhaus Orchestra in Leipzig. And Leipzig is a very important city in classical music, because that's also the city where Johann Sebastian Bach lived and played, the organ in the St. Thomas Church. Yeah. So that's why it's Mendelssohn's life, very lot of travels, lot of music. It's insane the amount of music he composed in such a short life, actually, even if he started very early to compose music.
What drove him to be so prolific? What was his
genius?
Just
a natural genius, like Mozart, like Schubert. Schubert died when he was 31, I think, and it's amazing how many things he composed. So he had the ability to produce great music and many masterpieces.
It just poured out of him.
Yes.
It was just in him. Well, so I'm interested in this piece, the Hebrides, Fingal's Cave. I know there's a story behind that piece. What's the story?
A trip to Scotland, and he was thrilled by the view of the island he was visiting. Yeah. There's a famous cave there called the Fingal's Cave, and this landscape, he had a very strong impression of this landscape, and he was really crazy about it. And he sent many letters to his parents and his sister, who was also a composer, Fanny Mendelssohn.
Right.
And he was obsessed with what he saw in Scotland. So that's how also he found inspiration for this overture. And there are some letters where he also wrote a piece of music on the letter, and that's actually the beginning of the overture.
Wow, that's so cool.
But the overture was first composed in Rome, in Italy, and then in London. So there are different versions, and we play the last version, the London version.
So wait, do separate pieces of just the overture or the full piece?
What do you mean?
Are you talking? You said that he wrote parts in different places, or he wrote the same thing in different places?
He wrote the same thing, but he was unhappy with the first draft.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Of the overture. So I don't know even if the first draft was first performed ever. When he was in his time, I don't know if it was first performed, but he was obsessed with this overture. That's why he just wanted to get it better.
Yeah, okay.
Like many composers, actually.
Yeah.
Many composers proceed like this.
So you guys are going to be playing the one that he wrote where now?
In London.
In London,
but
okay.
there are two versions, but we played the last one.
I see, okay.
Which is today, we call it the definitive, but with the new editions, sometimes we want to make the audience know also the older version and older versions, and it adds more repertoire for us. So it's interesting also to make comparison between the first version and the last version. It's very interesting.
We should hear some of this piece while we're talking about it. Should we just start at the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious, and listening to this piece, maybe, I don't know if this is a good example or not, what arguments are there to be made musically for calling him the last classical music guy, and what arguments are to be made for calling him the first romantic?
It's difficult for a musician of the 21st century to answer that question, because it sounds classical to me, but also romantic. Mm-hmm. Why romantic? Because I can feel that he wanted to reproduce by the music his impression of what he saw in Scotland. But classical, because the way the treatment of the orchestration is very classical, but the language, harmonic language, is not.
I see.
This kind of melody, this is totally unthinkable in the classical area.
Really?
Treated like this, yes.
Huh. So it's a different treatment of melody.
Yes.
For one thing.
Yes. It's floating.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that exists in Mendelssohn's work.
There's even a melancholic melody in classical music doesn't sound like this. It's more, I would say it's more controlled.
Okay.
And more precise. I don't know. There's less flow, you know.
Less swelling.
Yes,
I'm
exactly.
imagining like that's
Yes.
what I notice a lot in the more romantic period stuff, is that it's very emotional and it has these big moments of sort of epicness, you know.
Yes, and also
Yeah.
the difference with the classicism, most of the composers were at the service of people. So they were composing for someone else. Now, in the case of Mendelssohn, he was composing for himself.
That's interesting.
He was composing for to express the expression of feelings. That's how Romanticism started in music, but also probably in literature and poetry. It's different.
I've never heard that before. That's so interesting. That distinction that like before people were writing basically for others because they were being commissioned, or you know, because they belonged to a certain court or something like that. Now in this period, they're writing because they want to.
Yes, it's a different time. And also it's a concert overture, and it's rather new, because in the past an overture was composed to precede a drama or an opera or incidental music.
Yeah.
Now this is just a concert overture, and probably one of the first tone poems ever composed. Because the notion of tone poems comes later in the 19th century with Franz Liszt. That's maybe the first roots of a tone poems, or even also Impressionism.
And tone poem, just to remind our listeners, it's kind of it's painting a picture of a place or
or it's a piece of music, or it can be also a piece of music inspired by literature. A poem or a play.
Yeah, okay.
There's the Tchaikovsky composed Hamlet. It's a tone poem.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we should hear some of... Well, actually, first, tell me about the piano concerto that's on the program. This is Piano Concerto No. 1, also by Mendelssohn. Yeah. So, what's the story with this piece?
The story...
or if there is one, I don't know.
I don't know everything, but it was composed in Rome.
Yeah.
And dedicated to apparently a beautiful lady. And I think Mendelssohn had probably a crush on her. But apparently nothing happened between them. And she was an excellent pianist and a very good interpreter of Mendelssohn's music. Yeah. So the piece is dedicated to this woman.
Yeah.
And the feeling I have is that this piano concerto is a tour de force. This is extremely technical for the pianist. And I'm wondering if Mendelssohn composed this concerto like an exercise to improve his own technique or the techniques.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that it's not a musical piece. It's
right.
Not just about notes, but it's very impressive.
Yeah.
This is so fast, but the second movement, for instance, is a pure moment of poetry, and that's all I know.
Hey, that's way more than I know. But
because it's a short concerto, you know.
Yeah.
Beethoven fifth concerto lasts 35-40 minutes, and this one lasts 18 minutes. It's like it's a pyrotechnic concerto, really.
Say that again.
Pyrotechnic?
Oh, pyrotechnic.
Pyrotechnic,
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
Pyrotechnic.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Meaning it's
like a fireworks.
Bombastic.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yeah, okay. Let's listen to some of the piece. So I know this piece is definitely, it's like pyrotechnic, like you said. Yes. I mean, like this, it's very intense. Playing the piano on this piece must be incredibly difficult
and exhausting.
Yeah. But am I just imagining things, or does this sound more like a classical piece than a romantic piece? I mean, I'm sure that distinction is really blurry. You know, clearly Mendelssohn has kind of blurred the lines between those things, but I don't know what it is about that piece, but it sounded more sort of, I don't know, a bit more controlled.
It is yeah. Classical, but me, what I feel, there is an élan. You know what it means, yeah. Élan? Uh-huh. In that music, which, of course, Beethoven has, you know, but this particular élan is, to me, is typical from the early romantic time. Okay. But also the music of Mendelssohn is constantly like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that was a crazy piece. There are other composers who have kind of why they're known is that they were able to take things like exercises and turn them into art.
Yes.
You know, like they take this simple form and turn it into something memorable and
like Chopin and the Études de Chopin
and Liszt. It just did.
And Schumann, les Études transcendantes.
Yeah.
It's also it's a study, but it's a masterpiece.
It seems like that's kind of like the mark of a master composer.
Yes.
Is that, you know, you hear even these simple exercises and they're.
But some composers today are still renowned not by the quality of their music, but for the exercises they composed, like Czerny and Moscheles for the piano, and it's still played today. And you still, I don't know here in the US, but I remember when I was playing the piano as a kid, I used to do these kind of exercises by Moscheles, some studies, or by Karl Czerny, who was a very good friend of Beethoven, and but this music is still remembered today because of that. But it's not inspired like Schumann, Chopin, or Beethoven. No, it's completely different.
Yeah. So this is a little bit of a departure, this question. But do you get to choose the pieces that are on the program that you're playing?
Yes, most of the time.
Okay, so this is not like you're coming into Houston and they're like, we would like for you to conduct these pieces. You come in and say, I would like for the orchestra to play these pieces.
I have this luxury now in Houston to choose, of course, to choose not everything, because when there's a soloist, a guest soloist, and the soloist is choosing the concerto, or it is suggested that he or she could consider playing this concerto, or there's a list of concerto they can choose. Mm-hmm. But regarding the conductor, I remember the first time I was invited in Houston. I remember they let me choose the program.
Okay.
It depends on the orchestra. Sometimes they have some commitments. And next season, for instance, I'm going to Milwaukee, and I know that I have to do some Bernstein, because that's the century of the birth of Bernstein. So I have to do some Bernstein. Next season, I come back to Houston. The concerto is an American concerto for percussion and Corigliano. Mm-hmm. So I didn't choose the concerto, but I was asked to choose the second half, and also I was asked if I could do some Bernstein. So I will do an overture, the Candide overture, which is always a pleasure to conduct. And the second half will be French music, because they asked me, would you like to come back with your French music? So it depends on where you go.
I see. Okay.
Where you go. But it's not like that when you start your career. Right. It's more complicated. But as a guest conductor, there's also a repertoire which the music director has to do and wants to do.
Yeah.
I guess Andres in Houston wants to do the Mahler Symphony. The basics of the repertoire is for the music director most of the time.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's everything is about compromise also, and people are open-minded, and I do some suggestions, and they accept it or not. I'm open-minded too. So
yeah. So once you've gained years and years of experiences, you have things become somewhat organic.
Yes,
but are kind of roughly based on what, like, the needs of the particular orchestra. And
also because when you are a guest conductor, you're asked to. Some conductors have a trademark.
Yeah.
Me, I'm French. Obviously, I'm asked to do French music, and I'm always happy to do French music everywhere I go, because French music is in a way dying, because it's less and less played. So I'm fighting for it. Me and some colleagues. Yeah. But to me, it's a quest to make this French music still alive.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be a pigeonhole, with this repertoire in particular. But I like it.
Okay.
So when I'm asked to do some French music, it's always a pleasure for me.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that begs the question: why put this Symphony Pathetique, Tchaikovsky's piece, in with these two Mendelssohn pieces? What's the connection?
None. Maybe maybe Italy. They have a love for Italy. That's it. But there's no link.
Yeah. But why did you want to do it?
As far as I know, there's no link between the Mendelssohn piano concerto or the Hebrides, or with the Symphony Pathetique, which is a very personal symphony, and this is the end of the era of Romanticism. Mm-hmm. So maybe it could be the connection, the early Romantic and the end of Romanticism.
But even just musically for you, like, what was the connection? Did you just want to do these pieces, or you just were like, I like those, I'm going to put those on the program?
I didn't choose the piano concerto.
Okay.
The piano concerto was suggested to Ingrid.
Okay. Ingrid, I'm sorry.
Ingrid Flitter, she's the soloist,
okay.
and an amazing soloist.
Yeah.
So she was asked to perform this concerto, and I was asked what could we do before this concerto. So maybe some Mendelssohn too, a Mendelssohn overture. That's why.
Okay.
That's how it. Sometimes it's good to do what you want to do and what you would like to do. It's not. I like when the piece in a program are connected, but sometimes it's just for pleasure.
Just for fun.
Fun or pleasure.
You love the pieces.
Yes.
That's interesting. Well, tell me, to complete talking about the program you're going to be conducting tonight, tell me about Tchaikovsky and what the symphony is about.
The symphony is about, it is called Pathetique. but it is about the feeling of a man, Tchaikovsky, who has asking to himself many questions about life, the sense of life. And that's the meaning of the symphony. This is one of the most touching music ever composed, one of the most overwhelming music. And that's our job as interpreter, to try to find the keys, or to try to reach the feeling of Tchaikovsky. But it's very personal, even for us as an interpreter, because the music has so much to offer to the audience, but also to the artists. So we are blessed and touched in different ways. So it's the way I conduct Tchaikovsky 6th Symphony is probably different that another conductor will do. So it's very subjective.
I see.
But the legend of the symphony, especially the last movement, which is the finale, this is a slow movement actually, which is quite unusual. And I think this is the first time in the history of music that a symphony is ending with a slow movement. There were some attempts in the past, but for different reasons, for fun reasons, and like the Farewell Symphony by Haydn. All the musicians are leaving stage, but it's a slow movement.
Okay.
But it's very deep music.
Yeah.
And the legend is Tchaikovsky knew that he was going to die, commit suicide. But recently, some letters has been rediscovered because they were hidden by the regime in Soviet Union, and sometimes the legend is more interesting for the audience, but apparently it's more what happened to Tchaikovsky is more factual than the legend. He died poisoned because he drank poison water, but actually it was probably an accident.
I see. It's kind of like the whole thing with Mozart's death.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that it was ascribed to Salieri.
But it doesn't change the meaning of the music and the fact that even if it was an accident, Tchaikovsky was a very melancholic person, a very nostalgic person, and he had very strong feelings, and probably someone who was depressed too. But this is the new letters are also interesting because why he would have committed suicide, and at the same time he was at the top of his career. He was respected and admired in the entire world. So what was the purpose of that?
Right. Like what was his motivation?
No. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's we'll never know.
I have one final very serious question for you.
Yeah, Ura.
And that is, I've heard that you're obsessed with Mexican food.
I'm not obsessed with Mexican food.
That's the word on the street.
No, I like it very much, but I'm not obsessed with Mexican food. I'm upset with margaritas. That's different.
Yes, well, I mean, you wouldn't be human if you weren't obsessed with margaritas.
No, but I like it, but I'm not obsessed. I know that here, especially, this is better than anywhere else.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why it's interesting in Houston, but I like it very much.
Yeah.
I like Mexican food very much.
But obsession is a strong word.
No, I'm not obsessed with Mexican food. I like it very much. It's true.
Yeah, it's true. It's like here in Houston, I've eaten it in different parts of the country. And when I've eaten it in like up north, it's like, that's not Mexican food. No, that's not. Yeah.
You should try the Mexican food from Paris. It's different.
Really?
Really good.
I can't imagine French Mexican food.
No, it's real Mexican people who makes real Mexican food in a real Mexican restaurant in Paris, and it's really good. But different.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so what are you going to go eat after this? Where are you going?
Oh, probably in my hotel.
In your hotel?
At the restaurant of my hotel, and
because you have to conduct tonight.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Fabien Gabel, thank you so much for being on the Classical Classroom.
It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, everybody. That does it for this episode of Classical Classroom. For more Classroom, go to houstonpublicmedia.org/classroom. Follow our conveniently organized social media links there. Email me with your thoughts and feelings at dclay@houstonpublicmedia.org. Subscribe to, rate us, and review us on iTunes if you haven't already. Thanks to audio producer Todd's Cave Hulslander for making us sound nice today. Thanks to Mark DiClaudio for his piercing Pathetique eyes. Thanks to Fabien Gabel for coming into the studio today. Thanks to me for saying words, but most of all, thanks to you for listening. We'll catch you next time.